I'm Brent Barnett with Brownfield Ag News, and thanks for joining us on Outdoor Adventures. This week's show is a content partnership with the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, and we'll be diving into the topic of lead and lead poisoning as October 19th through the 25th is National Lead Poisoning and Prevention Week. Here with us from Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services is Jeff Wenzel and Teresa Wortmann. We thank you both for joining us here on the podcast this week, and we want to get to know you first as we get underway. Jeff, let's start with you. Could you talk with our listeners about your role with the department and some of the work that you do?
Yeah, I'm Jeff Wenzel, Chief of the Bureau of Environmental Epidemiology. The Bureau focuses mostly on human exposures to chemicals in the environment. So we work a lot with hazardous waste sites, fish advisories, harmful algal blooms, and just a number of environmental issues around the state, and Teresa and the lead programs.
Teresa, it's good to see you again. Teresa Wortmann with us. You were actually part of our most recent episode with the department back earlier this summer, and good to have you back on the show. How are you doing today, Teresa?
I'm good. It's glad to be back. So
absolutely. Tell us more about your role with the agency, or with the department.
Yeah, my name's Teresa Wortmann. I am a registered nurse, and I am the Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program Manager. I work with kids under the age of 6 who are exposed to lead and work with their families to help identify lead and connect them to services across the state.
Teresa, let's learn more about National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week. What's the purpose of this designation?
So the purpose of National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week is to bring awareness across the nation to lead poisoning and to kids that are impacted by lead. So not only does it bring awareness to the impacts and health concerns related to lead, but also it talks about housing and safety and ensuring that kids are in the safest environment possible. And this is a nationwide effort to bring awareness to something that a lot of people think does not exist any longer.
How are we, Teresa, how are we gearing up for National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So across the state, there are several activities that are going on. Some of the things that the Department of Health does is work with county health departments and local Head Starts to offer testing events that are conducted on site to ensure that kiddos that are enrolled in Head Starts have access to testing. And then we have been working on some new publications, including some posters. One of the newest posters that we have that will come out is called Comfort Measures. It talks with it gives information to families on how to hold a child during a procedure, making sure that they feel comfortable being during a finger stick or a blood draw, and gives families some ways to empower to ask for those supports during that time. We're also working on a master class, which is for clinicians. And that class is a 6-module lesson that will provide continuing medical education credits for clinicians across the state, and will provide information on testing requirements, the history of lead in Missouri, what to treat, when to treat, and if there is any additional chelation that's needed for a child, for example. Those pieces of information will be in there, and we're going to roll that out for Lead Poisoning Prevention Week.
And again, that week runs October 19th through the 25th, and the theme this year is Healthy Communities Start with Lead-Safe Homes. Jeff, let's turn to you here. What is so special about lead, and why is it used in so many products?
Well, lead's very malleable, shields radiation, makes things very pliable, makes your paints brighter and more durable, lasts longer, and so we've been using lead here in Missouri since the early explorers and Native Indians, showing the explorers how to use them and where to find the tools and different things. So I've been using it for a very long time.
A lot of great information here so far. Teresa, could you discuss some of the main health concerns with lead?
Sure. Lead is not naturally occurring in the body. It is a heavy metal, and when it is introduced into the body, it takes the place of calcium and iron in a lot of the sites within the body. So It can impact children's behavior, their learning processes. It can cause developmental delays in children, as well as slowed growth, anemia, which is low iron. It can decrease IQ, and in rare cases, it can cause a seizure, coma, and even death. And it's not just children that are impacted by lead. Adults across the nation are also impacted by lead and lead hazards because it's just as toxic for adults. Some of the things that we see for adults are impacts to their central nervous system. High blood pressure and cardiovascular disease have been linked with elevated blood lead levels, as well as miscarriages and low birth weight babies have also been associated with an elevated blood lead level in adults.
In Missouri, Jeff, what are some of the primary sources of lead exposure in the state?
Thanks, Brent. So nationally and worldwide, the biggest exposure to lead is lead-based paint. In the U.S., that was banned in 1978. So houses painted prior to 1978 could possibly have lead-based paint in them. But here in Missouri, we've had, I mentioned, the lead being shown to explorers in the 1700s and before. So we have a lot of lead mining here in Missouri. We have 60 counties, mostly south of the Missouri River in the Ozark region, that have had some form of lead mining. But those counties that have had the majority of the lead mining are Madison, Washington, St. Francis, a little bit of Jefferson County, Newton, and Jasper counties. And Iron and Reynolds counties currently have mining in them. So those areas have historic lead mining, and some of that waste has left those containing areas and could impact the surrounding areas and public still.
Let's get some additional thoughts here. Jeff, I'll ask you first. Are there any additional concerns with lead in Missouri? And Teresa, you could chime in here if you would like as well.
Well, in addition to lead-based paint and lead mining waste, we still have a lot of occupational exposures from people working in those mines and recycling facilities, those locations that make ammunition and other materials, and individuals that are doing hobbies like making their own sinkers and shot from lead.
So some of the other things that I think about whenever I think about the cases that we've worked over the course of time in the state of Missouri, we talked about lead-based paint, and it is primarily in homes before 1978. Lead-based paint in and of itself doesn't go away if you paint over it, for example. So it's important to know that friction surfaces, such as where your doors rub and your windows rub, can create a fine lead dust that's almost imperceptible and still is enough to elevate a child's blood lead level. So making sure that that paint is really good and intact is really important. And if it's not, that we need to take some measures to go ahead and address those lead hazards, including painting over that after you have scraped any loose paint off, and making sure that you're using lead-safe work practices when you do that. And there's information out there on websites, including the EPA has a book called Renovate Right, and how to do some of those home repairs in cases where you have a house that was built before 1978. The paint that was on the outside of a house, for example, can also come off. So not just inside, but outside as well. And in areas where the paint has come off the house, you can have elevations in soil as well. So sometimes we'll see that in drip lines along the house where the guttering is and where paint has fallen off, usually within a couple of feet of the house, can have higher elevations of soil. So if you have bare soil there, we should cover those areas. And one of the other areas that we test besides paint and soil whenever we go out to do an assessment is to look for the presence of lead in water. In Missouri, we do sometimes find lead in water, but it is not as common as some people might think. But we do see it still, so we always test for water to make sure that there's no elevation in the drinking water supply for a family.
Yeah, appreciate the insights here. Want to make the connection to the outdoors. Teresa, we have a lot of listeners that engage in outdoor type of activities. What concerns should they have about lead?
So we didn't talk a lot about hobbies, but hobbies are also an important source that we investigate whenever we talk to families about potential lead hazards and exposures. So families that engage in a lot of hunting and fishing activities are by nature engaging with lead in some way, shape, or form. So they will be engaging with lead either through sinkers for fishing, for example, through bullets, which are primarily manufactured out of lead because it's fairly inexpensive. So those are some areas that outdoorsmen might run into or encounter lead, even if they're not doing their own work, such as reloading or casting their own sinkers. They can still experience exposures, and their children can experience exposures through those hobbies. Now, if you are doing any kind of reloading, for example, or casting your own sinkers, then the risk of that hazard increases.
Jeff, anything you'd like to add in when we look at special precautions for hunting or fishing?
Well, as we were talking about before the show, Brent, we do a lot of fishing with the family. I have little ones. I've created my own little tackle boxes for the kids that have lead-free sinkers and jigs in them to help minimize their exposure to the lead while still having my own tackle box because I prefer lead, of course, but also making sure that you're washing your hands before you eat or drink or smoke. Not that we're encouraging smoking, but any of your hand-to-mouth activities, you want to make sure you're washing your hands beforehand.
Teresa, any other guidance you would add in when we look at helping families protect themselves from lead exposures?
Absolutely. So if you're going to be engaging some of those activities, my entire families are hunters as well, and they do love to go fishing. So one of the things that we make sure that we do is, again, like Jeff had mentioned, wash your hands really, really well. You can take a wipe with you and wipe your hands before and after handling your fishing sinkers, especially if you're going to be doing any hand-to-mouth activities like Jeff suggested. But if you are going to be making your own bullets, reloading, doing your own casting of sinkers, which my dad did all the time when I was young. So we had that in our backyard, and we had a smelting station where we melted down our own black powder bullets. So it's important to make sure that you limit your access to your children to those areas, because kids are inquisitive by nature, and they are going to pick up lead in a variety of ways, and the contamination from smelting is going to your own bullets and sinkers and melting those down will be very difficult to clean up to a level that wouldn't cause an elevation for a child. So just making sure you limit access to them. And then if you're going to be walking through that area frequently, that you make sure you wet clean that area really well, like the floors, any of the surfaces that you're working on with wet washcloth and throw those away. So wipe it down and throw it away. Don't worry, you don't want to recontaminate the area again and again by continuing to spread that around. Lead's a heavy particle, so it tends to stick and stay places, and it's important to try and clean up as much as possible. And then again, limit where your children are able to get a hold of those items on a regular basis.
As we wind down the segment this week, I'll ask you both for some final thoughts here on our topic. Just final thoughts about the importance of highlighting lead exposure and the potential of lead poisoning. Teresa, let's start with you on some final thoughts.
Sure. Oftentimes we hear, is that still a thing? We banned that from lead-based paint back in the 70s. Surely that's not still a thing here in Missouri. We find that lead is in so many products. It is all around us. It's in things that aren't intended to be toys that kids play with, for example, car keys, house keys. It tends to be in products that would surprise you. Sometimes it's in printed decals on a kid's T-shirt, then they end up being recalled. So it's important to be aware that lead is out there, it is in the environment, and we want to really ensure that testing is the key for families, that they get a test for their kiddos at least ages 1, 2, and 3. They should have a test every year. That way they can tell how much risk they have, and it is important because we can't see it. The symptoms of lead poisoning are usually very small and develop over the course of time, so we aren't seeing this come in as a presentation to the doctor's office. So advocating for a test for me is probably one of the most important things that you as a family member can do.
Very good. Jeff?
We haven't talked about statistics, but about 8% of the kids here in Missouri have elevated blood lead levels. So, just shy of 1 in 10. So, like Teresa said, testing and awareness are key.
Jeff, as we close, how can listeners find more information or more resources if they have any questions about this topic? Is this something that your department has available?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website's health.mo.gov. We have lots of resources on lead and lead education and fish advisories associated with lead. And if you can't find it there, we'd be happy to talk to you.
Again, just a reminder that National Lead Poisoning and Prevention Week runs October 19th through the 25th with a theme of Healthy Communities Start with Lead-Safe Homes. Jeff Wenzel and Teresa Wortmann joining us from Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services, and we appreciate you being with us here on another episode of Outdoor Adventures here on Brownfield Ag News. I'm Brent Barnett with Brownfield. Have a great weekend.